The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was standing in my kitchen, still wearing the cardigan I had thrown over my blouse because I was running late for a meeting. I almost ignored the number because it was unfamiliar, with a Washington, D.C. My name is Marion Leclerc, and that phone call was how I learned that an old friend from my Army years, a woman named Vanessa Holt, had used my name, my professional history, and my reputation to strengthen a federal contract proposal without asking me, without warning me, and without caring what it could do to my life. Area code, but something about the official-looking caller ID made me answer. The woman on the other end introduced herself as a government contracting officer and asked if she was speaking with Marion Leclerc. I said yes. Then she thanked me for my time and said she was calling to verify my availability as key personnel on a federal contract bid submitted by Carver Strategic Systems. I remember gripping the edge of my counter and saying, "I'm sorry, what bid?" She paused. Not a dramatic pause, just the kind of trained, careful silence government employees use when they realize a routine verification call has stopped being routine. She repeated the company name and the project title, a logistics modernization support contract connected to a defense agency. She said my name had been listed as the proposed senior compliance lead, along with my credentials, years of experience, security background, and a signed letter of commitment stating I would be available if the bid was awarded. I had never heard of the project. I had never heard of that bid, and I had definitely never signed any letter of commitment. Vanessa and I had served together more than a decade earlier. We had not been best friends in the dramatic movie sense, but in the Army, friendships are not always built on constant closeness. Sometimes they are built on long nights, shared pressure, bad coffee, private jokes, and knowing someone saw the same hard things you did. We met during a deployment support assignment when we were both in our 20s. I was serious, organized, and painfully determined not to be underestimated. Vanessa was funny, confident, and very good at making people trust her quickly. She could walk into a room full of senior officers and contractors and speak as if she had already been invited to the table. Back then, I admired that about her. After we left active duty, we kept in touch the way many veterans do. A message on Veterans Day, a comment under a promotion announcement, a quick congratulations when one of us changed jobs. Every year or so, one of us would say, "We need to catch up properly," and then life would swallow the plan. She eventually started working with a small government contracting firm, then became one of its owners. I moved into compliance and risk management, specializing in federal program controls and documentation. I had built a good career, slowly and carefully, and I guarded it because I knew how hard I had worked for every line on my resume. Vanessa knew that. She knew my background because we had talked about it over the years, and because my professional profile listed enough public information for anyone in our field to understand my value. That was the first unsettling part. The information she used was not hidden. It was the kind of information people casually offer in networking conversations, conference bios, LinkedIn summaries, old emails, and congratulatory messages. It was enough to make a fake commitment look real if someone knew how to dress it properly. When the contracting officer first explained what she was verifying, I did not immediately accuse Vanessa in my mind. I wish I could say I instantly knew what had happened, but that is not true. My first reaction was confusion. My second reaction was fear. My third reaction was the kind of loyalty that makes you hesitate even when a situation is already pointing in one direction. I asked the officer if she could tell me who had submitted the proposal. She said the prime was Carver Strategic Systems and that Vanessa Holt was listed as the proposal point of contact. I had not spoken to Vanessa directly in over 3 years. The last time had been a short phone call after she reached out to ask whether I ever did consulting work. I remembered telling her that I sometimes reviewed compliance frameworks for private clients, but I was selective because of conflicts and workload. I did not remember discussing any specific bid. I did not remember giving permission for my name to be used. Still, memory is a strange thing when panic hits. I thought, did I say something vague that she misunderstood? Did I send her a resume years ago? Did she think a casual conversation was enough? I told the contracting officer, as calmly as I could, that I had no knowledge of the bid and had not authorized my participation. She asked whether I was willing to put that in writing. I said yes, but I wanted to understand exactly what had been submitted under my name. She said she could not simply email me the full proposal package without following internal procedures, but because my identity and signature were involved, she would escalate the issue and provide the relevant excerpt if permitted. Her tone remained professional, but I could hear that something serious had opened between us. Before we ended the call, she said, "Ms. Leclerc, I need to ask directly. Did you sign a letter of commitment to Carver Strategic Systems for this solicitation?" I said, "No, I did not." Then she asked if I had authorized anyone to sign on my behalf. I said no again. After I hung up, I stood there for several minutes with my phone still in my hand. My coffee had gone cold. My meeting reminder chimed twice before I even moved. The strange thing about realizing your name has been used without permission is that you feel both invaded and responsible. I had done nothing, yet suddenly I was mentally reviewing my own conduct as if I might have left a door unlocked. Had I been too open with Vanessa years ago? Had I shared sample letters? Had I ever joked that I would help her if she needed me? The mind goes looking for a way to make the impossible make sense. By lunchtime, I had canceled 2 calls and contacted an attorney named Priscilla Nakamura, who had advised me years earlier on a consulting agreement. Priscilla specialized in government contracts, ethics, and professional liability. She was not dramatic, which was exactly why I called her. I explained the contracting officer's call as clearly as I could, and she listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked 3 questions. Had I signed anything? No. Had I agreed orally to be included on the proposal? No. Had I ever given Vanessa permission to use my resume or credentials in a bid? No. Then Priscilla said, "We need the document, not a summary of it." The actual document bearing your name. She advised me not to call Vanessa yet. That surprised me. Part of me wanted to call immediately and demand an explanation. Priscilla said, "If this is a misunderstanding, documentation will clarify it. If it is not a misunderstanding, you do not want to alert anyone before you know what was submitted." She also told me to write down everything I remembered about my last communication with Vanessa, including approximate dates, topics, and whether any documents had been exchanged. I spent that evening searching old emails, messages, and archived files. I found friendly notes, congratulations, a few comments about conferences, and one thread from 3 years earlier where Vanessa had asked if I ever took on advisory work. I had replied that I sometimes did, depending on the scope, and that I would need details before agreeing to anything. She answered with something like, "Totally understand, I'll keep you in mind." That was it. No solicitation number, no company authorization, no resume request, no letter, no commitment. I forwarded the thread to Priscilla. 2 days later, the contracting officer sent me a limited package through a secure link. It included the portion of the proposal listing me as key personnel, a copy of my professional profile as an attachment, and the supposed letter of commitment. I opened the letter first. My stomach dropped before I even finished the first paragraph. It was written on clean letterhead that used my full legal name and consulting business address. It stated that I, Marion Leclerc, agreed to serve as senior compliance lead for Carver Strategic Systems if the agency awarded the contract. It described my responsibilities in specific detail: review of internal control documentation, audit readiness support, federal reporting compliance, personnel training, and risk mitigation planning. It referenced my Army logistics background and my later work in government compliance. It even included a sentence about my commitment to supporting mission integrity through disciplined documentation practices, which sounded enough like something I might write that it made my skin crawl. At the bottom was a signature block with my name. The signature was not a perfect copy of mine, but it was close enough that someone who had seen my signature once might believe it. I had not written a word of it. I had not approved a word of it. Yet there it was, presented to the federal government as my promise. I called Priscilla immediately. She asked me to describe my reaction to the document, then told me to save the original download, not to alter the file, not to print and mark it up, and not to forward it casually. She wanted metadata preserved as much as possible. She also told me she would arrange for a forensic document examiner. I remember saying, "Do we really need that?" "I can tell you I didn't write it," Priscilla replied. "You know that, and I believe you. But this is a federal procurement matter. We need evidence that does not depend only on your memory and credibility." That was the moment I understood the seriousness in a new way. This was not just an offensive personal betrayal. This was documentation submitted in a government contract competition. If the agency believed I had committed and then backed out, my professional reputation could be damaged. If anyone suggested I had participated and then denied it after problems arose, I could be dragged into an investigation. If the bid had already been evaluated partly on my qualifications, the procurement process itself might be compromised. The next few weeks were some of the most anxious weeks of my career. Priscilla formally contacted the contracting officer, stated that I denied authorizing the use of my name or signing the letter, and requested that the agency preserve all related submission materials. She also asked that any references to my participation be treated as disputed pending review. Meanwhile, the forensic document examiner, a patient man named Harold Sutter, reviewed the letter, the file properties available from the downloaded document, examples of my real writing, and emails I had sent Vanessa years earlier. Harold explained that document examination in a case like this was not just about handwriting. It was about authorship indicators, formatting habits, source templates, language patterns, metadata clues, and whether the text appeared to have been assembled from genuine materials. I provided him with writing samples from old consulting letters, engagement proposals, and professional bios. I hated doing it. Each sample felt like another piece of myself being placed on a table, because someone else had misused the first pieces. Harold was careful with his language. He did not promise miracles. He said, "What we can often determine is whether the disputed document is consistent with your known writing and whether there are signs of imitation or template construction." While he worked, the contracting officer's office contacted me twice. Both calls were polite but tense. The first time, a procurement analyst asked whether I had any relationship with Carver Strategic Systems. I said I knew Vanessa personally from prior military service, but had no business relationship with her company. The analyst asked whether I had ever discussed employment, subcontracting, or consulting work with Carver. I explained the old general inquiry and sent the email thread through Priscilla. The second call was more direct. They asked if I would be available to provide a sworn statement if needed. I said yes. After that call, I closed my office door and cried for the first time. Not loud, not long, but from sheer pressure. I had spent years being careful because women in military-adjacent contracting spaces are often expected to be twice as composed and 3 times as documented. I had learned to keep clean records, clear boundaries, and professional distance. Vanessa knew that world too. She knew exactly what kind of risk this created. That is what made it worse. This was not someone outside the system making a naive mistake. This was someone trained inside a system where paperwork, authority, and accountability mattered. During those weeks, I kept replaying memories of Vanessa. I remembered her laughing in a supply office at 2 in the morning because a printer jammed during a deadline, and she said the Army ran on caffeine, forms, and stubbornness. I remembered her defending a young specialist who had been blamed for a tracking error that was not his fault. I remembered thinking she had a strong sense of fairness. Those memories did not disappear just because the evidence looked bad. They complicated everything. Betrayal is not clean when the person who betrayed you once helped you carry heavy things. Priscilla warned me not to romanticize the past at the expense of the present. She said, "You can care about who she used to be and still protect yourself from what she did." I held on to that sentence. When Harold's report came back, it was both technical and devastating. He found that the letter had been created from a template that closely resembled formatting I had used in legitimate consulting correspondence. Certain phrases matched language from my public professional profile, but other phrases appeared to be adapted from older emails I had sent Vanessa years earlier. The structure was too polished to be accidental. The commitment language included details that suggested the author understood my field but was trying to sound like me rather than actually being me. The signature image was inconsistent with my known signatures in pressure, spacing, and formation, but consistent with a traced or copied approximation. Harold would not say Vanessa personally created it because he could not know who physically assembled the document, but his conclusion was clear. The disputed letter was not authored or signed by me and appeared to be a constructed imitation using genuine samples of my professional style. I read that sentence 3 times. A constructed imitation. There is something uniquely violating about discovering that someone did not just borrow your name, but studied your voice. It meant this was not a clerical slip. It was not someone accidentally attaching the wrong resume. Someone had looked at how I wrote, how I described my values, how I framed my expertise, and then built a counterfeit version of my consent. Priscilla asked if I was ready for her to send the report to the agency. I said yes. Then I asked whether I should contact Vanessa. Priscilla paused before answering. She said, "If you do, keep it short. Do not argue. Do not threaten. Do not offer her a way to explain the document for you. Ask one direct question and let her answer." I waited until the next morning because I did not trust myself that night. I called Vanessa from my office with Priscilla aware that I was doing it. Vanessa answered on the 3rd ring, sounding cheerful and slightly distracted. "Marion, wow, hey. Long time." For a second, her normal tone almost knocked me off balance. I said, "Vanessa, a federal contracting officer called me about a bid from Carver Strategic Systems listing me as key personnel. There is a letter of commitment with my name and a signature. I did not write it. I did not sign it. Why is my name in your proposal?" Silence. Then she said, "Okay, I think there may be some confusion." My body went cold because that was not the response of someone surprised. That was the response of someone buying time. I said, "What confusion? She said her proposal team had understood that I was open to supporting them if they won. I asked who on the proposal team had spoken with me. She said, we talked about consulting a while back. I said, 3 years ago you asked generally if I ever consulted, and I said I would need details before agreeing. That is not authorization. She sighed, and I heard a door close on her end, as if she had stepped into a private room. Her voice changed, less bright, more defensive. She said, Marion, it was a bid. We needed to show capability. Nobody was trying to hurt you. I remember staring at the framed certificate on my wall from a compliance training program I had completed after leaving the Army. I said, you submitted a signed commitment letter in my name. She said, it was not supposed to become a problem. If we had won, I would have called you and made it worth your time. That sentence told me everything. Not only had she used my name without permission, she had planned to ask forgiveness later, after the government had relied on the representation. I said, did you create the letter? She did not answer directly. She said, our proposal consultant drafted language based on what I gave them. I asked, did you tell them I had agreed? Another silence. Then she said, I told them you were someone I could bring in. I said, that is not the same thing. She snapped then, not loudly, but with a bitterness I had never heard from her. You know how this works. Small firms have to compete against giants. We needed someone with your credentials. You would have said yes if I had asked properly. I said, you did not ask because you knew I might say no. She did not deny it. Instead, she said something that stayed with me more than any apology could have. She said, I thought our friendship counted for something. I answered, so did I. That is why I cannot understand why you would put me in a federal bid without my consent. Her breathing sounded uneven. For a moment, I thought she might apologize. Instead, she said, you are making this sound worse than it is. I told her the agency had the document. My attorney had the forensic report, and I would be cooperating fully. She said, Marion, please do not blow up my company over this. I said, you put my name on the document. I am not the one who created the problem. Then I ended the call. My hands were shaking so badly I had to place the phone flat on my desk. I felt anger, yes, but also grief. There had been a small piece of me that wanted her to sound horrified, to say a junior employee had acted without authorization, to produce some messy but less deliberate explanation. Instead, she had admitted the logic behind it. Her company needed my credentials. She believed I probably would have helped. She decided that was close enough to permission. That is a dangerous kind of entitlement, the kind that dresses itself as friendship. Priscilla sent the forensic report and my formal declaration to the contracting officer's office. My declaration stated plainly that I had not agreed to serve on the project, had not authorized Carver Strategic Systems or Vanessa Holt to use my name or credentials, had not written or signed the letter of commitment, and had no business relationship with the bidder. It included the old email thread showing that my only relevant communication with Vanessa had been a vague discussion years earlier, with no specific opportunity or consent. Priscilla also requested written confirmation that the agency would not treat me as associated with the proposal beyond being the person whose identity had been misused. The agency moved quickly after that. I was not allowed to see every internal step, but I learned enough. The bid was suspended from consideration while the matter was reviewed. Carver was asked to provide support for all key personnel commitments. Their responses apparently did not resolve the issue. Within days, the contracting officer notified Priscilla that the bid had been disqualified based on material misrepresentation in the proposal. The phrase sounded sterile, almost bloodless, but it carried enormous weight. Material misrepresentation. In federal contracting, those words can follow a company for years. Then came the notice that the matter had been referred for further investigation because falsified personnel commitments could constitute procurement fraud. I sat with that email for a long time. I did not feel triumphant. I felt exhausted. I had wanted my name cleared, and I had wanted the agency to understand I had no part in it, and they did. I had wanted Vanessa held accountable, and the process was now moving in that direction. But there was no clean satisfaction in knowing someone I once trusted had driven her own company into that kind of danger. People sometimes imagine accountability as a dramatic scene where the wrongdoer is exposed, and the wronged person finally feels free. In reality, accountability can feel like paperwork, phone calls, careful wording, and a hollow ache in your chest because the truth is uglier than you wanted it to be. A week after the disqualification, Vanessa sent me a long email. Priscilla told me not to respond, but I read it. Vanessa wrote that she had been under pressure, that payroll depended on new awards, that larger companies routinely played games, that she had believed I would be willing to support a project aligned with my expertise, and that she had never intended to create legal exposure for me. She said the letter had been a place pair, and that she had planned to formalize everything later. She also said she felt I had escalated too aggressively by involving an attorney and forensic examiner. That part angered me more than the excuses. She was still framing my self-protection as an overreaction. She was still acting as if the real harm began when I refused to quietly absorb what she had done. I forwarded the email to Priscilla. Priscilla's response was short. "Do not engage. Preserve this." So I did. The investigation continued beyond my direct involvement. I provided one additional statement and answered questions about my history with Vanessa. They asked whether Vanessa had ever had access to my signature. I remembered that years earlier, when she was applying for a Veterans Business Networking program, I had written a short recommendation letter for her and signed it electronically. I found that old PDF in my records. The signature on the fake commitment letter looked as if someone might have used that recommendation as a visual reference, though not an exact lift. That realization made me feel sick. A letter I had written to support her after service may have become one of the tools used to exploit me later. Harold reviewed that older letter too and noted similarities in the signature approximation and formatting cues. Again, he was careful not to overstate it, but the pattern became clearer. Vanessa had not needed a secret file. She had simply kept enough old professional material to construct something convincing. During this period, I also had to tell my employer what had happened. That was one of the hardest conversations, not because I had done anything wrong, but because reputational issues do not always wait for fault to be assigned. I worked for a firm that advised clients on compliance controls. If a federal agency saw my name in a disputed proposal, even as a victim, I needed my leadership to hear it from me first. I met with my managing director, Eileen, and brought Priscilla into the conversation. I explained the call, the forged letter, the forensic findings, the agency response, and my cooperation. Eileen listened carefully. When I finished, she said, "Thank you for documenting this early. That was all I needed to hear in that moment." The firm opened an internal note to preserve the record, confirmed there was no conflict with my employment, and told me to route any external inquiries through legal. I was relieved, but also embarrassed in a way that is hard to explain. Being wronged does not always feel clean. Sometimes you still feel exposed, as if people have seen you in a situation you should have been able to prevent. I had to remind myself repeatedly that deception works precisely because trustworthy people do not expect every friendly contact to become a threat vector. The contracting officer eventually sent a formal letter confirming that the agency had determined I was not an authorized participant in Carver's proposal, and that the disputed commitment would not be attributed to me. I printed that letter and placed it in a file with Harold's report, Priscilla's correspondence, the old email thread, Vanessa's message, and my declaration. I hope I never need that file again, but I keep it because documentation is how you survive events like this. It is not paranoia, it is memory with receipts. Months passed before I heard the broader outcome. Carver Strategic Systems did not win the contract, obviously. They were removed from that procurement and placed under review for responsibility concerns. Vanessa stepped down from her officer role while the investigation proceeded. I later learned through an industry contact, and then through a public notice, that the company entered into a settlement related to false statements in proposal materials. I will not pretend I know every detail, because I do not. Some parts were confidential, but I know they paid a penalty, accepted compliance monitoring, and lost eligibility for certain bid opportunities for a period of time. Vanessa was not criminally charged, at least not in anything I could find publicly, but her professional reputation in that niche changed overnight. People in government contracting talk, even when they pretend they do not. A small firm can survive a lost bid. It may not survive being known as the company that submitted a fake key personnel commitment. Priscilla told me the outcome was serious but not surprising. She said, "Federal agencies rely heavily on representations made in proposals because they cannot personally verify every relationship before evaluation. When a company lists key personnel, especially for specialized roles, that commitment can influence scoring, competitive standing, and award decisions. If bidders could casually include impressive names and decide later whether to make the relationship real, the entire process would become dishonest." She said, "This is why it matters. It is not just about your signature, it is about the integrity of the competition." That helped me understand why the agency had reacted so firmly. My name was the part that made it personal to me, but the larger issue was bigger than my name. Vanessa had tried to gain an advantage by creating the appearance of a resource her company did not actually have. She had turned friendship into a credential and assumption into evidence. Looking back, the thing that still bothers me most is not that she wanted my help. If Vanessa had called and said, "Marion, we are bidding on something and your background would make a major difference. Would you consider joining as a consultant if we win?" I might have listened. I might have asked for the solicitation, reviewed the scope, checked conflicts, negotiated terms, and maybe even said yes if everything was legitimate. Or I might have said no because I was too busy or because the role did not fit. Either answer would have been mine to give. She stole that choice. That is what people sometimes miss when they minimize unauthorized use as a shortcut or a placeholder. Consent is not a clerical detail. It is the difference between collaboration and exploitation. Vanessa later tried to reach me twice by phone. I did not answer. She sent one more message, shorter than the first, saying she hoped someday I would understand the pressure she was under. I deleted nothing, responded to nothing, and let Priscilla know. I do understand pressure. I understand payroll. I understand small businesses trying to compete against established contractors. I understand the fear of losing opportunities after years of work. What I do not understand is deciding that pressure gives you ownership over another woman's name, labor, and reputation. I do not understand turning a shared army past into permission for fraud. And I do not understand asking the person you endangered to carry sympathy for the burden you created yourself. The emotional aftermath lasted longer than the formal process. For months, I found myself being guarded in ways that made me sad. When former colleagues reached out, I wondered what they wanted. When someone asked for a bio for a panel or a recommendation, I read the request 3 times. I tightened my professional profile, removed some unnecessary details, added a note that my participation in any proposal or project required written authorization, and created a standard response for credential requests. I also began watermarking certain documents and using limited-purpose letters more carefully. None of those steps can eliminate bad faith, but they reduce opportunity. Priscilla helped me draft a simple policy for myself. No one may list me as key personnel, advisor, consultant, reference, or committed resource without a signed agreement specific to that opportunity. It sounds obvious, but obvious boundaries are often the ones people test because they assume kindness will fill the gaps. I also had to grieve the friendship. That may sound dramatic for someone I had not spoken to regularly in years, but old military friendships carry a strange permanence. Even when contact fades, you store people in a trusted place because of what you went through together. Vanessa had occupied that place in my mind. After this, I had to remove her from it. I thought about the younger women we had been, trying to prove ourselves in rooms where people sometimes talked over us until we forced them not to. I thought about how proud I had been when I saw her name attached to a growing company. I had believed her success was a good thing. Maybe parts of it were. But success built under pressure reveals character. Vanessa had reached for mine when hers was tested. One evening, about 6 months after the call, I found the old recommendation letter I had written for her. I had said she was resourceful, mission-focused, and trusted by her peers. At the time, that was true as far as I knew. I wondered whether I had missed signs later, whether confidence had hardened into entitlement, whether ambition had outrun ethics little by little. Maybe. Or maybe people are capable of disappointing us in ways no earlier evidence can predict. I did not delete the letter. I placed it in the same file with everything else, not because I wanted to punish myself by keeping it, but because it told the full story. I had once trusted her enough to help. She had later used that trust as material. Both things were true. The final closure came in a quiet way. Priscilla called to say the agency had closed its inquiry as to me, with no further action or testimony needed. She said, "Your record is clear." I thanked her, then sat alone for a while. I expected to feel lighter, and I did, but only gradually. Clearing your name is not the same as feeling untouched. Still, that call mattered. It meant the official story matched the truth. It meant the fabricated letter had not succeeded in rewriting my life. It meant the paper trail Vanessa created had been answered by a stronger paper trail of facts. Since then, I have spoken about this experience privately with a few other women in contracting and consulting, especially veterans who move into civilian federal work. I do not share it as gossip. I share it as a warning. Be careful with your credentials. Be clear in writing. Keep records. Do not assume someone who once stood beside you will always protect your name when money and competition enter the room. And if you discover your identity has been used without consent, do not let embarrassment delay action. Ask for the documents. Get counsel. Preserve evidence. Correct the record early. You are not being difficult by defending your reputation. You are being responsible. If there is one sentence I wish Vanessa had understood before all of this, it is that friendship can open a conversation, but it cannot replace permission. She could have called me. She could have asked. She could have accepted my answer. Instead, she built a false version of me and handed it to the government as if I were a resource she could deploy. That decision ended our friendship, damaged her company, and forced me to defend a reputation I had spent years earning honestly. I do not hate her. Hate would require more energy than I am willing to give. But I do not trust her, and I do not miss the version of the friendship that only existed because I had not yet seen what she was willing to do. Sometimes the deepest betrayal is not loud. It arrives as an official phone call, a polite verification question, and a document with your name at the bottom that you never signed. If you were in my position, would you have called Vanessa first and tried to handle it privately, or would you have gone straight through an attorney and the contracting office the way I did? I would really like to know what you think, because situations like this test the line between loyalty and self-protection. Share your thoughts, and if this story reminded you how easily trust can be misused in professional life, subscribe for more real-world stories about betrayal, accountability, and people finally protecting the names they worked so hard to build. Thank you for listening, and I hope you take care of yourself and your reputation out there.